Hello and welcome. In this video, I'm going to test the Constraint Manager and compare the Constraint Managers in Altium Designer versus Cadence OrCAD. Who will win? I'll be judging based on some key fundamental criteria, namely the user interface, the ease of use, help and documentation, and most importantly, the efficiency and the reliability and accuracy. Those last two are the most important. So let's get into it. Traces need to be 40 mils, maybe 1 millimeter apart. So see, right now they can be as close as 0.2 millimeters, but I want to make them or force them to have to be further away from each other. Likewise, I'll do that in OrCAD. So let's go to design, place a room where the rule will apply, place rectangular room. Okay, and then you right click. Now let's go ahead and change the name of this room. What's this room called? Double click. We'll call it space 1mm. Pretty easy. Now let's go to design rules, and we're going to make a new rule. Yeah, and then you also have to know within room and then put in it. I like how it auto populates, though this is not as intuitive as what I would have. I mean, it makes sense once you actually know how to do it, but yeah. So I'm going to hit 1 mm, and that's for everything. And then just for the track to track, I will make it 1. Okay, click apply, and then OK. So now these should have errors in this region. Oh, no error. Well, let me see. Ah, here we go. Now the behavior is like this. They are at 0.2 spacing, 0.2 millimeter spacing, but when I try to move them back in here, yeah, see? All right, let's see how OrCAD does it. These traces can be pretty close to each other, 0.2 millimeters, and it's the same board. It's the same board design. Oh, credit goes to Fidelity Academy for the MM. That will be the name of the constraint region. Now I'll draw the rectangle, go like this, right click, done. Okay, cool. For line to line for spacing 1 mm, I'll set it to 40 mils, which is the same as 1 millimeter. And then if I move them, it pushes everything away as soon as it gets to like 40 mil spacing. Okay. Just like it's supposed to in that region. If I delete the region, it applies. Right. So that's also for that method. I also avoid programming anything, having to type in stuff. So OrCAD wins that for me. All right, here I have the Constraint Manager in OrCAD. Now, I can see the electrical groups. I like how it's organized on the left, so it's easy to click on electrical, physical, spacing, same net spacing, manufacturing. It's very organized in that way. It's not jumbled up. Looking at this at a glance, or the first time looking at this, I would not know what to do or where to go. In fact, I recently got a question about how to set the physical spacing rules and whatnot. So, you know, what would be really helpful is graphics. But anyway, this doesn't have graphics, so I would like to see graphics there. Now I could go to setup and do constraint modes. Here we go. So where the constraint modes window has pictures and graphics and whatnot, and detail points on the properties for these, it's really helpful. So I'd actually like to see the graphics put into Constraint Manager directly, because going through Constraint Manager, I can't tell that I need to set some spacing constraint set layers first, or physical constraint sets first, like right click create. I wouldn't even know intuitively that I could right click and be able to do that, and that I have to make a physical constraint set without some kind of training. That's not intuitive. In addition, there are no graphics here to show me what is line width. Does line mean trace or track? Does the neck? So I'm not I mean, it's good that it's organized as far as the user interface, but I want to see those graphics to get some explanation going. Let's go to Altium now. In Altium, we look at the design rules. We also have a rule wizard, so that's interesting. So let's go to rules. Here, how would I intuitively be able to know how to set up my rules? So let's see. Here we have little icons, just like how an OrCAD has the icon, so that's good. But nonetheless, if I click on the actual clearance thing, I don't see any graphics. If I click on the actual rules, then I do see some sort of graphic, which is great. The matrix too as well. I like this matrix. It's simple and easier to look at. Everything's in one view. So that's good. So I would say overall, the feel and look of Altium is better. Mostly because of the graphics that are in there and how this matrix is laid out. Other than that, though, they're pretty much the same. So I'd say Altium wins this one for me. Let's talk about ease of use between OrCAD versus Altium Constraint Manager. It's that I can set up my rules in a matrix of spreadsheets that overlap one another. And I thought that was really cool. So being a systems-minded person, I like to systemize and change and mass change things and organize things. So let's look at the top level. If we can go to our constraints, this is physical constraints, right? And I can create a physical C set that says this is supposed to be my power constraint set. So I have a set of rules for my default traces, a default set of rules for the line width, that is the trace width, the necking down width of the trace, the differential pair gap and all that stuff. I can do that for my default traces, and also for my power traces I can make another set of rules, right? Make that 15 mils thick for the traces for that group, and I can just keep doing that and doing that. And then with these categories, once I have these categories mapped, really, I can pull in any design and then have my standard categories, and then just overlay those types of classes on the specific nets. Yeah, and that way I don't have to manually change everything for my power net and for my data bus. I could just assign them a specific class or constraint set, and that applies for physical, electrical, and spacing. So that is very clever. That's very ingenious. Next, I have the Design for Manufacturing wizard. So let's go here to Setup. I got my Altium in the back there. Let's go to Setup, and where is this Design Through DFM wizard? I really like this because I can actually have a customized template of manufacturers and fabricators and assembly houses settings according to their tolerances. I can bring that in, hit next, and then run my DFM or Design for Manufacturing thing automatically, and it automatically generates rules depending on my manufacturers. Now it does have default settings, but let me show you how this works when it comes to manufacturing, fabrication, and all that stuff. So when I update my DRC, it'll show me not only my regular rules, but my manufacturing rules. I cannot tell you how much time this saves because I didn't do this properly when I submitted a design, right? And when I submitted a design and they had a couple of these issues, errors, and whatnot, it's because I hadn't gone through the full Design for Manufacturing matrix application. And I ended up spending an extra week's worth of time correcting those errors. If I'd used all of this stuff properly, I'd have no issues, which has happened before, All right, so the DFM wizard is fantastic. I really like that. Next is the constraint modes. You can decide which sort of constraints you actually want to look for, what you actually care about. This constraint modes is very nice and very informative. And even if you need help, you just click on the help and it brings up the context menu to show you the help for the specific thing you're looking at. Very convenient. Next, we can assign rules in the schematic or the PCB. In OrCAD Capture, you can set some constraints here too. So let's go to PCB Constraint Manager. This feature is also available in 17.2. So let's click OK. You can go in here and say that, say to your power electronics engineer or your power electronics designer in the schematic says, hey, maybe this trace around, I don't know, let's pretend there's a trace around a switching inductor or something, and it needs to be 15 mils. You can set your constraints here to your PCB, do a PCB update layout, yeah, and then there will be no connectivity changes, but there will be constraint changes. Right here, see that 15 I just changed? It was 8, now it's 15. So that's very, very awesome. That means your electrical or your electronics design engineer who may just work with the schematic can push constraints to your PCB designer. So let's take a look at Altium. Let's see what Altium does when it handles constraints. There's one issue I have with this though. That's the querying and the code. I don't like the idea of it. So if I want to set up some special region or something like that, I can do all of that in OrCAD without having to figure out where, if I need to do it within a room and then a type within room and all this stuff, or do a custom query that says, for instance, if I want to right click, create a new rule, do a custom query that says for all, let me see, is track, something that is a track, and then I gotta name the track like SS or something. It is track and is net or is polygon. Like if and this and all that stuff. But in general, it's interesting because I don't have to really do any of that in OrCAD PCB editor. I can just set up my matrices, and I've still have yet to have a problem. So it seems in the long run, this matrix-based approach or the spreadsheet approach, overlapping and overlaying things, has an overall easier path to getting constraints done and made for the PCB. I've yet to run into a problem. But with Altium, I have to set this up sometimes to set up some rules. Okay, so for me, for ease of use, I have to go with OrCAD. It's just easier once I understand what to do. So let's talk about help and documentation. What I like about OrCAD in general and Constraint Manager is that I can click on help and go straight to documentation while in my Constraint Manager. Also, check this out. We can right click, create physical C-set. And I'm like, well, what's a physical C-set? I can click on the help button. See right here? Boom. In context, just immediately available. I don't have to look at online documentation or anything like that to just get what I need to explain what I'm looking at right then and there. See, it explains in detail what a physical constraint set is. And in addition, it gives you a tutorial, a little mini tutorial on how to implement this knowledge and what you have here. So this just in time contextual help and documentation that's at the tip of your hands, also that explains what you're working with and then shows you how to use what you're looking at. It's just, they go the full mile when it comes to the help and documentation. Now let's look at Altium Designer. As far as the help is concerned, when I try to do like new in Altium Designer or look for help, I need to go on the user forums and then search for what I need to search for. They have the new for Altium Designer, but let's see, is there anything? Let me see if I can go to my design rules, right? And then click on help. Yeah, it's not there. So, okay, right. So there's really no contextual help at all in here. I actually need to go in Altium's documentation and on their website and there user forums and then search for other things. That's if I even know what to name the thing I'm searching for. That's a big problem. So this OrCAD's the clear winner for me. I don't really have much else to say on this one. Yeah, OrCAD has won by leaps and bounds on this one, help and documentation. And that's extremely important, especially if you're working with the tool for the first time, or on your own, or you don't know everything you need to know to get through the design. So when it comes to efficiency, I want to be able to work on my design and not have to fight with the software tool just to get my designs done. I want to focus on the designing. All right. And a constraint manager in OrCAD, once you do understand how to use it, where you make your rules first and then you apply the rules to the specific nets and groups, which is not hard to understand really. If you're shown how to do it, once you know how to use it, it makes the process so much easier. So let me show you. The quick spreadsheet approach is really nice. I can make my spreadsheets. I have my spreadsheets here with all my rows and columns and everything, and then I can expand and collapse my columns and the SMD pin to default top layer or analog trace or bottom layer. Like this intersected spreadsheet approach is really nice and reminds me of Excel actually, because Excel is, spreadsheets. And so this is really good. And then I can really see everything in the full matrix of every item that's affected. I like that level of awareness and transparency and also control as far as constraint management, because your constraint manager really needs to control the design. I can control things on the top level and on the minute level, on the very trace specific level. I can right click, create a spacing constraint set, SCS1. This applies to all conductors, planes, and whatnot. And then I can go to my specific nets and then choose Q3 and then apply the specific constraint to that net or to that net group. And then, right click, I can clear it, or I can right click and go to the spacing constraint set to immediately. So it's just extremely powerful. The DFM wizard, and you can use the files from the manufacturer who you're working with, and now you're working with designs for specific manufacturer constraints. Just very amazing. And then constraint exports, I can export my settings for reuse. So I can export my constraints, my technology file for more than my constraints, just my electrical C sets, worksheet file. I can create an HTML file so people can review my constraints and maybe set things manually. They can print it out and draw and say, hey, we need spacing here and there. And I can also check mark and uncheck what I want and don't want in my constraints. It can be design specific. It can be a generic set of constraints, so I don't have to reset these up again. Yeah, and I can just save it, and then I can import it. Let's say somebody is set up their constraints and they're in a different country or way across the world. They can email it to me or keep it on a shared drive where I import those constraints, and I don't have to worry about it. I can just go on about designing, going about my business. Yeah, this is very awesome. So that's great for design reuse. And then designs are always changing, and it's just easy to adjust the constraints as well on the system level and on the top level and on the specific net and spacing level. So let's look at Altium. When it comes to Altium, you have to do some understanding about the query language when it comes to the design rules and the design rule wizard and then setting those things up. Yeah, so that's not fun. And on top of that, I also need to look at objects. So I have to go to my panels, and let's see what we have here. We can look at PCB. And we just have this sort of clutter of the panels. If I want to, let's move this over here. Okay. All right. Managing and keeping track of constraints as you're doing the layout, because you do have to dip back into the panels as you're doing layout to understand and to filter out certain properties for certain traces as you're doing the routing and layout. So for me, when it comes to constraints and efficiency, OrCAD is the clear winner for me. All right, now this is the most important metric for me. When my design is done, or while I'm working through my design, can I count on Constraint Manager to have my back? When it comes to OrCAD PCB Editor Constraint Manager, I don't have to guess about whether my constraints are good. I can always go in the full matrix, in the full spreadsheet, go to all my layers, find what I need to find, change my test point, like my test via to whatever constraint, my rule, all of these things in the matrix. Since everything is visible, yes, it's a lot, but since everything is visible, it's easy to know if things are good. And also, when I make my change and I just want it from through pin to A ground, I can do that, and it's 7.32 mils or something like that. Yeah, it's just quick. It's just that easy, and the change is immediate. So I really like that about Constraint Manager as well. Also, I don't have to worry about making any mistakes when it comes to coding or the rule setup or the logic of setting up constraints. It's just really straightforward. I don't have to. It's not complicated, and I don't have to think about whether I'm making a mistake in my constraints. And the thing about it is, that's it. It's plain and simple, just like that. When it comes to Altium, it's possible to get my logic set up wrong in the rule wizard, because I have to imagine how these rules are being applied in the logic. Much more of a problem if I try to do a custom query manually. Yeah, logically, I'm typing up my custom query, but am I imagining all possibilities where this might apply or may not be true or may cause issues for other parts of my design? And that's just with if it'll cause problems for other parts of my regular constraint regions and clearance rules. What if it'll cause problems for other parts of my custom queries? That's another thing. So it's very easy if you don't know what you're doing, and if you're not careful, it's very easy to have some overlap or some issues when it comes to logic in the coding of these constraints. And if I have a rule for my polygon pour or traces, I have to make sure the priority is high or low enough. See? Around polygons, I have to set it so that my clearance around polygons and whatnot is a certain level above or below some other rule. Okay, if you don't set your priorities up properly, you might end up in a situation where your polygon pour doesn't pour when it's supposed to, or it's always pouring and you can't see the traces underneath it, or it's poured in and bumps a trace or something like that. So it's a little tricky. OrCAD also has the option for priorities in a constraint manager, but I've really never needed to use them. All right. So for reliability, hands down, it's OrCAD, and it's just so easy to set up, and I've never had a problem. So I usually prefer doing my designs in OrCAD. Okay, well, I'm so glad you made it to the end of this video, and so let's just do a quick recap of the Altium versus OrCAD. When it comes to the constraint manager in OrCAD and in Altium for the user interface, I'd say Altium. I prefer Altium's user interface for the constraint manager or the design rules. Now, when it comes to ease of use, I actually want to say that I like using Altium's interface more, but creating rules in OrCAD, it ultimately leads to easier execution. It's kind of a toss-up for me. I like both. Now, when it comes to help and documentation, especially in the constraint manager, and even in general, OrCAD is the clear winner. The help and documentation is top-notch, and it's within the context and just in time. I don't have to go to another medium like a web browser for the online documentation or forums. Whereas in Altium, I do have to go elsewhere for the help that I need. So for the help and documentation, OrCAD is the winner for me. Next, when it comes to efficiency, OrCAD again takes it because I can use the quick spreadsheet approach. Rules are ready. They're ready defined for me. I just need to change certain little things. It has the DFM wizard to import the manufacturer's constraints. I can also export my constraints to reuse them whenever I want. And it's easy to change and adjust the constraints. Whereas in Altium, I have to understand some of the query language. I need to understand how to use the design rules wizard, and it takes some time to code for my specific constraints sometimes as well. So overall, when it comes to efficiency, OrCAD is more efficient for me. It's the winner here. Now, what about reliability and accuracy? Again, OrCAD, I don't have to guess whether the rule is actually set up correctly in Constraint Manager. Also, whenever I make a change in Constraint Manager, it's immediate, and I know that it's accurate and it's the right thing that I want to change, that one specific thing or a group of things. And I don't have to deal with code. I don't have to deal with making mistakes on overlapping logic. When it comes to Altium, I might miss some rules depending on the priorities that are set, which is a little more common than I would like when it comes to real designs. And there are possible errors I could run into because of the coding that I might need to do. It's not always, but am I sure that the coding versus coding A versus code B, logic A versus logic B aren't going to conflict with each other. So for me, OrCAD is the winner when it comes to reliability and accuracy. The next thing is the DRC results, and just results in general when it comes to checking my rules. In OrCAD, I can customize what's shown in the DRC, but I can also do that in Altium just as well. And for my DRC or design rules check, I can browse and navigate the different errors and issues on my OrCAD PCB, but I can also do the same in Altium. So it would be a tie for me, but that one little thing where how Altium executes on showing me those errors is what gives it to Altium for me. Otherwise, I would even call it a tie. Okay, so I hope that is a good recap for overall when it comes to constraint management. OrCAD is the clear winner for me. That is why I do most of my designs in OrCAD, because the Constraint Manager is your best friend when it comes to PCB design and layout. It's my best friend for sure. And OrCAD is definitely ahead of the game when it comes to constraints. It's really second to none here. All right. So thank you for watching this video on how you can do certain things with Constraint Manager and this full comparison video between Altium and OrCAD Constraint Managers. Peace.